Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old, not Athena. The 44 Fountaine-Pajot you see here behind me is not our boat, but I'm going to be lending a hand here for the next couple of weeks in the sweltering heat in Charleston, South Carolina. The most interesting job on our to-do list is this keel here. According to a recent survey, there might be some water trapped inside of it. That's not an uncommon issue, and in fact the catamaran right next to us has the exact same issue. Now we'll take a closer look at the keel, and depending on what we find, the fix might be somewhat labor intensive or really easy.
My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the topsides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure.
Just to give you guys a bit of background, like I mentioned, this is not our boat. It's owned by Ava's sister, Nina, and her husband, Julian. You might remember Julian from such previous hits as the passage from the Canary Islands down to Cape Verde. Nina and Julian's boat is a 2017 Fountaine-Pajot Helia. As with any boat, there's a bit of maintenance we need to take care of, like for instance, anti-fouling the hull. And then there's also some more interesting projects that we can sink our teeth into. One of the more interesting things I want to take a look at is this sail drive here. There's an almost brand new sink on here that's indicating that there might be a bit of an installation problem with this sail drive. So we'll take a closer look at that. We also need to replace the seals here inside of the sail drives, both of them, not the diaphragm, but the seals. And then of course we have that keel issue. The biggest challenge here, for me at least, is going to be the heat. This morning there was a heat advisory on the TV promising a sweltering 115 degrees Fahrenheit. That is something like 46 degrees Celsius. That, to me, is downright horrible, but let's see how the day goes. We should have almost everything we need for our planned projects here. The keel is a little bit of an unknown, so we haven't purchased epoxy or fiberglass yet. But if you're a long-time viewer of the channel, you might recognize this guy. This is the 110 volt version of my much beloved Bosch 150 Turbo. Ava and I are slowly starting to look for a bigger boat to refit, and that will most likely happen here in the US. So I figured I might as well pick up a 110 volt version right now. Now, this sander, or the European version of it, the 230 volt version, I've used for about 7 years, and I think it's fair to say I've used and abused it, and it's been an absolute treat. It is one of my favorite tools on the boat. So if you're gonna have a lot of sanding in your future, I highly recommend you pick up one of these. I'll include a link down in the description. The keels on this catamaran are sacrificial keels. That means they're a completely separate part from the rest of the hull. So if you somehow hit something or damage your keel, it shouldn't interfere with the integrity of the hull. That is a really cool design. Now, from what I've read, these are built much like when I built the new rudder for Athena, with 2 fiberglass shells that are bonded together and filled with some kind of foam. But the survey, like I mentioned, revealed high moisture levels in this keel. So let's take a look and see what we find.
It says that there's water in the keel. It shows some photographs with the thermal imaging. I believe it shows the photographs with the thermal imaging. I may be lying to you. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, yep. Looking at the thermal imaging from the survey, I think maybe there is a leak somewhere on the forward edge of the keel. Now, if this is in fact foam filled, I don't think we're going to see a ton of water pouring out, but there's only one way to find out.
Whoa!
Well, you learn something new every day. That was a surprisingly large amount of water. We drilled a bunch of holes all throughout the keel, And what's kind of interesting is we would drill one hole, it would be squeaky dry, then we'd drill a hole a few inches away and water would pour out for minutes. The good news here is I don't think this is necessarily a super serious issue. At least back in Denmark, most older sailboats still have wet rudders. And the big concern with the wet rudder is the stainless rudder stock and the whatever fingers or plate you have welded on there, then that weld goes bad and you lose your rudder that way. But these are 100% composite, there's no stainless involved, so a bit of water in there, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. We've discussed our options, and I think because we have a limited amount of time here up on the hard and because we don't want to undertake the major operation of actually dropping the keel, I think our best option is to drill a bunch of holes to get out as much of the water as we possibly can. Then we'll glass over those holes once we're done and make sure that we do a very thorough job of sealing between the hull and the keel. The keel here sits inside of a pocket that's inside of the hull, so this protrudes up into the hull itself. Now along this joint here, there's a bunch of what I've read is polyurethane sealant. We haven't noticed any weeping from the center line of the keel here, where I assume the two halves are smushed together when they built the thing, so I think maybe our leak is hiding up inside of the pocket. But if we do a really good job of sealing along the joint here, well, that hopefully will keep water out. With the water slowly draining out of the keel, we decided to prep the hull for fresh coats of anti-fouling. This involves sanding every square centimeter of the hull with 80 grit sandpaper to key the surface. The areas where you can stand up or sit down are easy, but the bottom of the hull can be a little bit tricky. Enter stage left the worn out anti-fouling office chair. Most yards I have ever been in have had some kind of decrepit old office chair that everybody uses to get to those hard to reach overhead places. It makes a very unpleasant task, merely somewhat annoying. After hours and hours of glorious sanding, the hulls were finally prepped for anti-fouling. While I was sanding, I noticed something on the starboard keel. None of the seams on the keel are weeping, but water is seeping out of the joint between the keel and the hull. I am 99% sure the leak into the keel is hiding somewhere up inside of the pocket. We decided to remove the caulking around the keel as the next step. This was a delightful test of our patience, as it took almost an entire day of prying, cutting and scraping to remove the sealant. A combination of cutting and using a big angled pick seemed to be the best approach. While removing the sealant, we found many obvious leaks and multiple areas where it looked like the sealant had never actually formed a watertight seal. I'm starting to suspect the keel has been wet since the boat was launched in 2018. Our plan of drilling a bunch of holes in the keel, draining as much water as we possibly can, patching those holes and then recaulking along the keel hull joint is most likely not going to be a permanent fix. But like I mentioned, I don't think there's any real super urgency required here. But on the other hand, there is something to be said for making a lasting repair now. We're all right here now. I'm here to lend a hand. That means Nina and Julian won't have to hire somebody in to do the glass work. Athena is going to be up on the hard for the remainder of hurricane season, so it's not like Ava and I are going to be going anywhere. So yeah, there is something to be said for dropping the keel. We are still actively weighing up our two options: temporary fix, permanent repair. Now, from what we've heard so far, in terms of dropping the keel, it shouldn't be that bad. So what we've learned so far is that the keel is adhered in place. There are no keel bolts or anything like that, just adhesive. And that adhesive should, in theory, only be about 6 inches up the side. That means we should be able to get a sawzall or a hacksaw blade or something in between the hull and the keel and cut away at that adhesive. Now, there shouldn't be any adhesive, at least from what we've heard, on the top of the keel. If that's true, then once we've cut the adhesive off the sides, we might be able to rock it a little bit and have it just drop down. Now, sounds easy. Whether it's going to be easy or not, only time will tell. With the keel dropped, the rest of the repair should be very straightforward. It would just be a matter of cutting open the keel, digging out all of the wet foam, letting the keel dry out, then refoaming, reglassing, and reinstalling. I think 2 to 4 weeks should do, including the time it takes for the keel to just sit and dry out on its own. But yeah, we should make our final choice whether or not we're going to drop the keel later today. Buying a used boat, even if it's only 5 years old, there's always the risk of some surprises. That could be something like a wet keel, the survey found that, or it could be something that a survey would never find, like for instance a sail drive related surprise. Yesterday we removed the props and it turns out somebody cross-threaded the living daylight out of the shafts in these sail drives. In our case, it's not going to mean any additional work because we're already planning on replacing the lip seals inside of the sail drive. So that means we already have to crack the sail drive open, and once that's done, it's no big deal to swap in a new shaft. But it does mean the added expense of $900 for a new shaft, just because somebody got a little trigger happy with an impact driver.
At least for me, mulling over big decisions seem easier when actively engaged in a mindless task. Fortunately, we need to clean both of the props in preparation of applying prop speed. This is the perfect opportunity to figure out all the pros and cons of dropping the keel. The cleanup process was time-consuming but not difficult. For this initial cleaning, we're using a couple of wire wheel brushes to remove any marine growth and old anti-fouling. Before the final application of prop speed, we have to sand the surface with 80 grit to get a good mechanical bond, but that will be quick once the props are sparkling clean. As you can see here, the blades of the prop clean up really nice and look basically brand new. It took us about 5 hours to clean the two props. As with applying any coating, 99% of the work is prepping the surface. Prop speed is expensive, and I would hate for the application to fail because of sloppy surface prep. Besides, like I mentioned, we had a lot of thinking to do in regards to the keel situation.
It's the next day, and yesterday we made up our minds. We're gonna be dropping the keel. In fact, we've already ordered the reblocking of the boat for early next week. As you can see, right now the weight of the boat is on the keels. For us to be able to remove the keel, of course we have to have the boat reblocked. Each reblocking of the boat is about $600, so it makes sense to do as few of those as possible. And if we get the hull anti-fouled before we reblock the boat, well then we'll already have anti-fouled where the blocks are gonna be. So our focus this weekend is going to be to get the hull anti-fouled, but before we can anti-foul, there are a few spots we need to touch up with some primer where we've accidentally sanded through the barrier coat. We'll be using anti-fouling from Seahawk, so we picked up their recommended primer called Tough Stuff. I've never worked with any product from Seahawk before, but once you've worked with a few types of two-part paints, you'll notice there are a lot of similarities. The hardener or catalyst is always nice and runny, and the base usually has a goopy mess at the bottom. After having mixed both parts thoroughly in a ratio of 1:1, the instructions specified a 20-minute induction time, so for 20 minutes I sat and watched paint not even dry. Touching up the small areas on the hull only took about 10 minutes, and with the short overcoating interval of only 3 hours at 23 degrees Celsius, we were able to get all 3 coats applied in a day. It's Saturday morning, and today is first coat of anti-fouling day. Now, I applied copper coat to Athena before we left Denmark, so I haven't actually applied traditional anti-fouling for a really long time. This should be a fun blast from the past. This is the anti-fouling Julian has chosen to go with. The main criteria for choosing this product is the fact that the previous owners used this stuff. Choosing an anti-fouling is always a little bit tricky because what seems to work well in certain locations will not work as well in other locations. So whenever somebody asks me what my favorite anti-fouling is, well, I always just say go with what the locals are using. Athena's copper coat is still kind of in the testing phase. It worked really well up in the cold waters in Northern Europe, but we haven't really been in the Caribbean long enough for me to definitively say if it's working well or not. I did notice a little bit of growth form in about 3 weeks that I would have to scrape off, Mainly not hard growth, but a single barnacle, stuff like that. But I suspect some of that growth is just because I need to reactivate the copper coat a little bit. But that is a story for another time. Now today we've already gone ahead and washed down both of the hulls. Now all we need to do is just tape, and then we can start applying anti-fouling. After an hour spent masking off the waterline, we got to crack open the first of the roughly 7 gallons we need to apply. The mixing was made a little bit easier by cheating and using a mixing attachment on a drill. The application was very similar to other types of traditional bottom paint I've used in the past. Applying anti-fouling is very rewarding. It goes on easy, and because the finish is not super important, you can go pretty fast. That being said, during the 2 days we spent applying anti-fouling, I did on multiple occasions clap myself on the back for choosing copper coat, especially here in the heat in South Carolina. No rain was forecast, but rain we got. If it hadn't been for that rain, we would have been able to maybe get the 3 coats on in 1 day. Alas, the next morning it was back to the salt mine to apply the last 2 coats before we finally got to pull the tape off the hull. And that's it, both of the hulls are anti-fouled. That gives the anti-fouling Monday to cure, and then Tuesday we're going to be reblocking the boat in preparation of removing the keel. We're going to take Monday off and do a bit of non-boat related stuff, maybe check out some of the scenery around here. But yeah, then Tuesday we'll get back to dropping the keel, which I think is going to be very exciting, and also I believe it's going to be a YouTube first. I've searched high and low and I've found no other videos about dropping the keel on a catamaran. I'm going to end this week's video here because after our 3-week break where we went to Michigan and had our little wedding celebration, we're almost back to real time. So that means the pressure is back on, so I have to get this video rendered and uploaded. But yeah, hope to see all you guys back here in the yard next Sunday for hopefully a keel removal. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!